Captain Maya Chen pressed her palm against the cool glass of the observation deck, watching Earth shrink to a pale blue dot behind the Intrepid. The Vordax vessel dwarfed their ship, its crystalline hull refracting starlight in patterns that hurt her eyes if she stared too long. Ambassador Krell stood beside her, his scaled skin shifting colors with each measured breath. "Your world is beautiful," the ambassador said, his translated voice resonating from the small device at his throat. "Rare to find such diversity of ecosystems on a single planet." Maya nodded, uncertain how to respond to the alien diplomat. The crew, Earth's best and brightest, moved with barely contained excitement throughout the ship. Dr. Washington worked tirelessly in the engineering bay, examining every inch of the fold space drive the Vordax had permitted them to study. Lieutenant Rodriguez meticulously documented every conversation, every cultural exchange for future generations. 3 days into their journey, the Vordax ship suddenly dropped out of fold space, the view screens filled with swirling debris, the remnants of a battle. "A collective attack," Krell explained, his scales darkening to a deep crimson. "This colony was vibrant just one lunar cycle ago." Maya watched silently as the Vordax ship navigated through the wreckage. Twisted metal and frozen bodies drifted past, beings of shapes and forms entirely alien yet somehow familiar in death. The faces of her crew reflected the horror they all felt. "The Council has fought them for generations," Krell continued. "They consume everything. Resources, technology, knowledge. Nothing is left behind. Why invite us now?" Maya finally asked the question that had bothered her since first contact. "Earth has barely mastered interplanetary travel. What can we possibly offer against such an enemy?" Krell's multifaceted eyes studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "The Council has 17 species, Captain. 17 approaches to technology, warfare, and diplomacy. For thousands of years, we'd fought with orderly, predictable strategies perfected over centuries. And they've learned to counter them all," Maya surmised. "Precisely." Krell's translator couldn't convey emotion, but his body language suggested respect. "Humans are unpredictable. Your species makes intuitive leaps that our logical processes would never consider. You see patterns where we see chaos, and chaos where we see patterns." As they approached the Council station, Maya felt the weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders. Through the viewing portal, the station appeared like a massive artificial star, its branching arms extending for kilometers, each housing representatives of vastly different evolutionary paths. "They will underestimate you," Krell said quietly. "Use that to your advantage." The Intrepid docked in a berth designed for much larger vessels. As the airlock cycled, Maya straightened her uniform and prepared to lead humanity's first steps into a galactic civilization. Behind her, Dr. Washington and the diplomatic team stood ready, faces set with determination. "Remember," she told them, "we represent all of Earth now." The doors slid open, revealing a grand reception chamber filled with beings beyond human imagination. The journey that would transform humanity's place in the cosmos had only just begun. Dr. Elijah Washington rubbed his bloodshot eyes as holographic equations swirled around him like luminescent smoke. 8 months into humanity's integration with the Galactic Council, and he still felt like an undergraduate fumbling through advanced calculus. The Zirazi quantum principles defied human intuition, yet something about their mathematical approach tantalized him with its almost familiar patterns. "You require rest, Doctor," chittered senior scientist Exact, the Zirazi mentor assigned to his research team. The insectoid being's compound eyes reflected the blue glow of the holographic displays, facets sparkling with what Elijah had learned to recognize as concern. "Just one more simulation," he mumbled, manipulating the 3-dimensional equations with practiced gestures. "There's something here we're missing." The Zirazi made a sound that the translator rendered as a sigh. "Your species pushes biological limits unnecessarily. Efficiency decreases by 17% after your standard 20 hours of consciousness." Elijah smiled despite his exhaustion. The Zirazi's obsession with precision had initially frustrated him, but he'd grown fond of their methodical nature. Unlike other council species, they saw potential in humanity rather than primitive savages who'd gotten lucky with their invitation. The Washington Drive isn't just about efficiency, he explained, isolating a particular equation and expanding it. It's about thinking differently about fold space itself. While conventional council drives created tunnels through fold space, requiring enormous energy, Elijah's approach treated spacetime as malleable fabric. Rather than punching through, his drive would pinch 2 points together, requiring a fraction of the power. Theoretical models suggest this approach is fundamentally flawed. Exect observed, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Theoretical models based on Zirazi and Vordak's perceptions of physics, Elijah countered. Human mathematics evolved differently. The emergency alert interrupted him, bathing the laboratory in pulsing red light. The central communication hub activated automatically, displaying a frantic Zirazi transmission. Though Elijah couldn't understand the rapid chittering, the images were clear enough. A distant Zirazi colony under collective attack. How long until Council Defense Forces arrive? He asked, already knowing the answer. Standard response time. 72 hours. Exect replied, antennae drooping. The colony population is 8,000, including 4,000 larvae. Elijah looked at his unfinished drive simulations, then at the distress call. The Intrepid's in orbit. We've retrofitted the prototype. It's untested, but probability of success is below acceptable thresholds, Exect warned. That's the difference between us, friend, Elijah said, already transferring his calculations to a portable device. Humans don't need acceptable thresholds when lives are at stake. 12 hours later, Captain Chen stood on the Intrepid's bridge as Dr. Washington's modified drive engaged. The familiar gut-wrenching sensation of fold space transition was replaced by a gentle pressure, as though the ship were slipping between layers of reality. When they emerged, the Zirazi colony's binary stars shone brightly through the view screen. Transit time? Maya asked, her voice steady despite the risk they'd taken. 17 hours, the navigator reported incredulously. We've shaved 3 days off the journey. On the colony world below, collective bioships swarmed like locusts. The Intrepid was vastly outgunned, but they had the element of surprise and the desperate creativity that had become humanity's hallmark. Battle stations, Maya ordered, eyes fixed on the endangered colony. Let's show the Council what humans can do. Admiral Maya Chen felt the Intrepid shudder as another collective blast struck the failing shields. The battle for the Vordak's homeworld had raged for 6 hours, and the Council's elegant battle formations had collapsed into desperate individual actions. Her small fleet of 20 human vessels remained in tight formation, awaiting orders from General Azrox that seemed increasingly unlikely to come. Status report, she commanded, gripping the arms of her command chair as the inertial dampeners struggled to compensate for evasive maneuvers. Shields at 27%. Lieutenant Rodriguez responded, fingers dancing across the tactical display. Council casualties at 32% and climbing. The collective has adapted to their standard defense protocols. Maya studied the three-dimensional battle projection hovering before her. The collective bioships moved with uncanny coordination, anticipating every Council countermove. Yet within that perfect choreography, she noticed something the Council's military leaders had missed. There, she said, pointing to a subtle ripple pattern in the collective formations. Every time they shift vectors, there's a momentary delay on their northern flank. And look, she traced the movement with her finger. They always favor clockwise rotations when regrouping. Commander Jackson frowned at the display. You're suggesting they have a blind spot? Not exactly. Maya highlighted a sector of space near the Vordak's moon. I'm suggesting they're optimized for predictable opponents. The Council fights by the book, strategies perfected over centuries. The collective has learned those patterns. She opened a channel to the human fleet. All vessels, this is Admiral Chen. Implement Chaos Protocol Epsilon. Confirm receipt and prepare to execute on my mark." General Azrox's scaled visage appeared on the main screen, mandibles flaring with indignation. "Admiral Chen, your fleet will maintain position as ordered. This is not an Earth training exercise." "With respect, General," Maya replied, meeting his compound gaze steadily. "If we don't try something different, there won't be a Vordax homeworld to defend in another hour." Without waiting for his response, she signaled her fleet. "Execute now." The human vessels split into 5 strike teams, each taking radically different vectors. 2 groups accelerated directly toward the collective center mass, a suicide run by conventional tactics. Another dove beneath the plane of battle, while the 4th and 5th executed a pincer movement from opposing angles. "Time your weapons release randomly," Maya ordered. "No patterns, no coordination with other teams. Maximum unpredictability." From the Krell command vessel, General Azrox watched in horror as the human ships broke formation, seemingly abandoning all strategic sense. "Chen has lost her mind," he growled to his officers. But the effect on the collective was immediate. Their perfect formation faltered as they attempted to counter threats coming from multiple directions with no discernible pattern. The bioships twisted to track the erratic human movements, creating gaps in their previously impenetrable defense. Maya's own vessel took a direct hit, sending her crashing to the deck as emergency systems blared. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead as she pulled herself back to the command chair. Through the damaged view screen, she watched the Council forces recognize the opportunity and surge into the gaps her people had created. "Signal the Council fleet," she ordered through gritted teeth. "The collective adapts to patterns. Tell them to abandon standard attack protocols and follow our lead." As consciousness began to fade from her injuries, Maya saw General Azrox's vessel move into formation alongside the remaining human ships, adopting their chaotic approach. For the first time since the battle began, the collective was in retreat. Dr. Elijah Washington stood before the assembled council representatives, acutely aware of how out of place he looked among the diverse alien dignitaries. The emergency war chamber, carved from a single massive crystal deep within the council station, amplified his voice as he continued his presentation. "The collective's coordination defies conventional communication limitations," he explained, manipulating the holographic model hovering above the central table. "There's no detectable signal between their vessels, no command structure we can identify. Yet they move with perfect synchronization across vast distances." The Vordax science minister flicked a dismissive hand through the display. "We have studied this phenomenon for decades, human. There is no solution." "That's because you're looking for a technological answer," Elijah countered, restoring the hologram. "But what if their advantage isn't technological at all? What if it's biological?" The chamber erupted in murmurs as Elijah projected his latest findings. Microscopic analyses of collective bioship fragments recovered after the Vordax homeworld battle. "These cellular structures contain quantum-entangled particles," he said, highlighting the relevant sections. "Not artificial implants. They're grown, integrated into their very biology. The collective doesn't need to transmit orders. They share consciousness instantaneously across any distance." Ambassador Krell leaned forward, golden eyes narrowing. "If true, this presents an insurmountable advantage. Quantum entanglement cannot be blocked or jammed." "Not with conventional approaches," Elijah agreed, nodding to his team of human and Zirazi scientists waiting at the chamber's edge. They rolled forward a spherical device approximately 1 meter in diameter, its surface swirling with iridescent patterns. "This is a chaos disruptor," he announced. "It doesn't attack the entanglement directly. That would be impossible. Instead, it introduces quantum noise patterned after human brainwaves." The young engineer beside him, Dr. Sophia Lin, stepped forward. "Human thought is inherently chaotic compared to other council species. Our neural patterns contain true randomness that quantum systems cannot predict or filter." The council representatives exchanged skeptical glances as Sophia activated a small-scale demonstration. Within the device's field, quantum-paired test objects desynchronized immediately. Theory is meaningless without practical application. General Azrox growled from his seat. The collective attacks Proxima Centauri in 3 days. Our simulations predict total defeat. Then we have nothing to lose by trying, Admiral Chen replied. She had recovered from her injuries at the Vordax battle, though a fresh scar still marked her forehead. We've equipped 50 disruptors to council vessels. My engineers can install more before the fleet departs. 3 days later, Maya stood on the bridge of the Intrepid, watching the battle unfold from the relative safety of Proxima Centauri's outer system. The Council fleet advanced in standard formation, Chaos disruptors inactive until the critical moment. Collective forces detected, Rodriguez announced. 300 bioships and counting. Signal the fleet, Maya ordered. Activate disruptors on my mark. As the devices powered up throughout the fleet, she held her breath. If Elijah's theory was wrong, they faced another devastating defeat. If right, disruptors at full power, Elijah reported from the science station, his voice tight with tension. Now, Maya commanded. Across the battlefield, 50 spheres erupted with cascading waves of quantum interference. The effect on the collective was immediate and dramatic. Bioships that had moved with single-minded purpose suddenly jerked and drifted, like puppets with severed strings. It's working, Elijah whispered, watching the tactical display in awe. The hive-mind connection is breaking down. Within hours, the once unstoppable collective retreated in disarray, unable to maintain their perfect coordination under the barrage of human-patterned chaos. Admiral Chen walked briskly through the ornate corridors of the Krell diplomatic vessel, the ceremonial medal pinned to her uniform catching the light from crystalline fixtures overhead. Behind her, a delegation of human scientists and officers followed, their faces carefully composed despite the tension that had been building for weeks. The Emperor appreciates your service to the Council, the Krell escort hissed, mandibles clicking with what Maya had learned to recognize as artificial politeness. Especially your creative approach to the collective problem. Creativity is a human specialty, Maya replied evenly. She had noticed how the word was increasingly spoken like a slur in Krell diplomatic circles. The reception hall gleamed with polished obsidian and gold, trophy weapons from a dozen conquered species displayed prominently along the walls. The Krell Emperor himself, nearly 3 meters tall with scales that shifted between crimson and gold, stood on a raised platform at the hall's center. Admiral Chen, he intoned, voice resonating through translator implants. Your species continues to surprise us all. The ceremony proceeded with rigid Krell formality, but Maya's attention kept drifting to a communications officer who repeatedly glanced at a personal device. Something was happening, something not on the schedule. Later, alone in her temporary quarters, she accessed the Intrepid's secure systems remotely. For weeks, she had been monitoring unusual transmission patterns between Krell High Command vessels. Initially dismissing it as paranoia, the growing frequency of encrypted bursts had convinced her to establish a discreet surveillance protocol. Computer, analyze latest Krell transmission intercepts, she whispered. The display flickered with partial decryptions, not enough to understand the content, but enough to confirm her suspicions. The transmissions contained human colonial coordinates and defense specifications, but why would the Krell need such? The alert siren shattered her concentration. Emergency notifications flooded her display. Simultaneous attacks on 7 human outposts, not from the collective, but from Krell battlecruisers. Maya's fingers flew across the interface, sending emergency evacuation codes to all human settlements. She had just connected to Earth's defense network when her door exploded inward. Krell security forces stormed her quarters, weapons leveled at her head. Admiral Chen, the lead officer, snarled, "You are detained for conspiracy against Council security." Hours later, bleeding from a cut along her temple where she'd been struck during her capture, Maya watched helplessly from a detention cell as the Krell Emperor addressed an emergency council session. The massive view screen showed human colonies burning, orbital defenses shattered. "We have eliminated a dangerous fifth column within our alliance," the Emperor announced, mandibles spread in what humans had nicknamed the victory fan. Evidence confirms human communication with collective forces. Their unpredictable nature made them the perfect infiltration vector. Maya strained against her restraints, fury building as she watched most council representatives nod in agreement. Only the Zerazi ambassador stood in protest, joined by representatives from 3 smaller species. "The humans have been our most effective weapon against the collective," the Zerazi insisted, mandibles clicking rapidly. "This action is unwarranted and strategically catastrophic." The Emperor's scales darkened to deep crimson. Those who harbor sympathies for human treachery may find their own loyalty questioned. Through the tears of rage blurring her vision, Maya spotted Dr. Washington being led past her cell in restraints. He met her eyes briefly, his expression grim but determined. He mouthed 2 words before being pushed forward. "Europa base." Even in captivity, humanity was already planning survival. Admiral Chen limped through the crowded tunnels beneath Europa's icy surface, nodding to haggard refugees who pressed themselves against the rough-hewn walls to let her pass. 3 months since her daring escape from Krell captivity, and the provisional headquarters of human resistance had grown from a scientific outpost to a sprawling underground city housing nearly 20,000 survivors. "Admiral on deck," called a young ensign as Maya entered the command center. A repurposed ice mining facility, now filled with salvaged equipment and makeshift displays. "Status report," she requested, easing herself into a chair. Her leg, broken during her escape and improperly healed, throbbed constantly in Europa's low gravity. Commander Jackson gestured to the central holographic display. "Krell patrols have increased along the Jupiter corridor. They've established checkpoints at all major transport lanes between the inner and outer system." "And Earth?" Maya asked quietly. Jackson's expression tightened. "Occupation continues. Major cities under martial law. The Krell are systematically dismantling our industrial infrastructure, shipping it off-world." Maya nodded grimly. "And our projects. Dr. Washington has requested your presence in Lab 3 when you're available," Jackson replied. "He says they've had a breakthrough." 15 minutes later, Maya stood in the converted ice cavern that served as the main research facility. Dr. Washington looked even more exhausted than she felt, dark circles under his eyes testifying to sleepless weeks. "You said you had something to show me," Maya prompted. Elijah's tired face broke into a rare smile. "2 somethings, actually." He gestured toward a sleek shuttle at the far end of the cavern. "Meet the first ghost ship." Maya approached the vessel, noting its unusual configuration. "It looks empty." "That's the point," Dr. Lin explained, emerging from beneath the craft. Grease streaked her face, but her eyes shone with fierce pride. "We've integrated holographic projectors throughout the hull. The ship can appear fully crewed on any scan, while actually requiring only 2 pilots. The Krell search for life signs and energy signatures consistent with a normal crew complement," Elijah added. "This will register as a standard transport with 25 personnel, while actually carrying additional cargo or refugees." Maya ran her hand along the hull. "This could get our people through the blockade and bring in critical supplies," Sophia confirmed. "But that's not all." She led them to a sealed chamber where a heavy vault door stood open. Inside, a technician wore what appeared to be standard body armor, but with an unusual iridescent quality to its surface. "Adaptive armor," Elijah explained. "We've incorporated principles from collective bioships. The armor learns from each weapon impact, becoming increasingly resistant to that specific energy signature." The technician demonstrated by firing a low-powered Krell disruptor at his own armored arm. The first shot produced a visible energy ripple across the surface. The second, aimed at the same spot, barely registered. "It's not perfect," Elijah cautioned. "It requires reset periods between engagements, and it can only adapt to a limited number of weapon types simultaneously. But it gives our fighters a chance." "How soon can we deploy?" Maya asked, hope kindling for the first time in months. "First ghost ship leaves in 48 hours, Sophia answered. "Captain Torres has volunteered for a reconnaissance mission to the collective border." Maya raised an eyebrow. "The collective? Why not focus on the Krell?" "Because," Elijah said quietly, "I believe I understand why the collective hasn't pursued us despite the Krell's claims of human collaboration. Torres is going to test a theory that might give us our first real ally." "Operation Phoenix commences in 30 minutes, Admiral Chen announced to the assembled fleet commanders, her voice steady despite the enormity of what they were about to attempt. The holographic strategic map dominated the center of Europa's command bunker, displaying the positions of 200 ghost ships now scattered throughout Krell supply routes. 18 months of hit-and-run tactics had built to this moment. Hundreds of daring raids had yielded essential technology, intelligence, and resources. Captain Torres' reconnaissance mission to collective space had returned with data that transformed their understanding of the conflict. Now humanity would either regain its place among the stars or face extinction. "Strike Team Alpha will target Krell communication relays here, and here," Maya continued, highlighting critical nodes. "Teams Beta through Delta will simultaneously disable their main staging areas in the Saturn and Uranus sectors. Once their coordination is compromised, Strike Team Epsilon will deploy modified chaos disruptors to their command networks." Dr. Washington stepped forward, his once slender frame now gaunt from years of overwork and ration supplies. "The disruptors have been calibrated to target Krell military frequencies specifically. Their hierarchical command structure is actually more vulnerable to disruption than the collective's distributed consciousness." Commander Jackson reviewed the tactical projections. "Even with ghost ships and adaptive armor, we're outnumbered 20 to 1. If they manage to coordinate a counterattack—" "They won't," Maya interrupted, her confidence unwavering. "The Krell's greatest strength is their rigid adherence to established protocols. When those protocols fail, their entire military structure collapses." Lieutenant Rodriguez gestured to a secondary display showing Earth's orbital defense grid, now under Krell control. "And the homeworld." Maya's expression hardened. "I'll lead that mission personally." 3 hours later, Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Intrepid, watching stars streak past as the upgraded Washington Drive carried them toward Earth. The vessel, once the pride of humanity's nascent fleet, bore the scars of desperate escapes and dangerous missions. Like its crew, it had been broken, rebuilt, and emerged stronger. "Chaos disruptors report deployment successful," the communications officer announced. "Krell communications across 17 sectors showing degradation. Ghost Fleet reports minimal losses." Maya allowed herself a small smile. The first phase had worked perfectly. Krell vessels throughout the system were suddenly deaf, blind, and unable to coordinate their responses. "Approaching Earth defense perimeter," the navigation officer reported. "Krell dreadnoughts attempting to form blockade formation, but their movements appear uncoordinated." "On screen," Maya ordered. The main view screen displayed the once familiar blue sphere of Earth, now surrounded by angular Krell vessels moving erratically, like insects trying to maintain formation in a windstorm. Without their rigid command structure, the individual captains fell back on contradictory protocols. "All vessels, execute attack pattern Washington," Maya commanded. "Target their command ships first, then defense platforms. Remember, we're not just fighting for revenge. We're fighting for our future." The human fleet, augmented with ships from their Zerazi allies and other Council species who had secretly maintained contact, surged toward Earth. Their vessels, retrofitted with adaptive armor that learned from each Krell attack, absorbed punishment that would have destroyed them 18 months ago. As the battle for Earth began, Dr. Washington transmitted the final evidence package to every communication node in Council space, irrefutable proof of Krell collusion with elements of the collective, planning to sacrifice all Council worlds once humanity was eliminated. Admiral Maya Chen stood at the observation window of Harmony Station, watching the ceremonial fleet maneuvers with quiet satisfaction. 5 years had passed since the liberation of Earth and the subsequent Krell surrender. the massive space station, constructed at the Lagrange point between Earth and the Moon, served as the headquarters for the newly formed United Galactic Alliance. Below her, representatives from 28 species mingled in the Grand Concourse, former enemies now engaged in diplomatic, scientific, and cultural exchange. Most remarkable were the collective ambassadors, partially individualized members of the hive mind who had gradually learned to interact with singular consciousness species. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Dr. Washington asked, joining her at the window. Age and hardship had silvered his hair prematurely, but his eyes remained sharp and curious. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it," Maya admitted. "There were moments on Europa when I thought humanity was finished." Outside, a formation of sleek vessels, human, Zerazi, Vordax, and even one collective bioship, executed a perfect spiral pattern, their hulls catching the sunlight in a dazzling display. "The Council just approved the expansion of the Washington Institute," Elijah said. "We'll be adding research facilities for quantum biology and consciousness studies. The collective has agreed to share insights into their distributed awareness systems." Maya nodded. Their warning about the extragalactic threat has certainly focused everyone's attention. Nothing unites former enemies like a common danger. The truth had emerged during the peace negotiations. The collective's aggressive expansion had been driven by fear of something approaching from beyond the galaxy's edge, a threat so alien that even the collective's hive mind could barely comprehend it. Human diplomatic creativity, combined with council technology and collective awareness, had forged an unprecedented three-way alliance to prepare for this future challenge. Commander Rodriguez reports the integrated defense grid is ahead of schedule, Maya continued. Adaptive systems modeled on both human neural networks and collective biological principles. No rigid protocols for an enemy to predict and exploit. A group of young officers entered the observation deck, human, Zerazi, and even a Krull cadet, now studying together at the newly established Galactic Defense Academy. They saluted Maya with respect bordering on awe. "Supreme Commander," the Krull cadet acknowledged, his mandibles dipping in the gesture of profound respect that had once been reserved only for emperors. After they continued on their tour, Elijah chuckled. "I'm not sure I'll ever get used to seeing Krull cadets saluting human officers. They're learning adaptability from us," Maya observed, "just as we're learning precision from the Zerazi and biological integration from the collective. We're all becoming something new together." Her communication device signaled an incoming message from Earth. The holographic display showed the recently completed memorial gardens in Geneva, where monuments honored those lost in the Krull attacks. Crowds gathered for the 5-year commemoration ceremony, humans standing alongside alien allies who had once been strangers or enemies. "We paid a terrible price," Maya said softly, studying the monument. "But look what we've built from the ashes." Elijah nodded, his expression contemplative. "That may be humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, not our technology or our tactics, but our resilience, our ability to face devastating losses and still imagine a better future." Beyond the station, the first vessels equipped with the next-generation Washington Drive prepared for their maiden voyage to the galactic rim. The initial reconnaissance of the approaching extragalactic threat. Human captains commanded most ships, their unique combination of caution and boldness deemed essential for this mission into the unknown. "Ready to make history again?" Maya asked, as they prepared to board the command shuttle that would take them to the flagship. "Always," Elijah replied with a smile. "The galaxy's just getting interesting."